South Africa is reportedly nearing a crucial trade agreement with the United States. But will this help to improve bilateral relations between the two? Here's the answer. So South Africa's Trade Minister, Parks Tau, has claimed that South Africa is nearing a very important trade deal with the United States. Still, there are two main questions surrounding this. First of all, is it likely that a trade deal will be reached given the massive tension between the two countries over the past few months? And second of all, if a trade deal is reached, how will this actually affect relations between South Africa and the US? Would it be a turning point? But before we go on and answer these questions, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free, and all you have to do is hit the subscribe button in the bottom left corner of this video. Now, let's get into it. So if we take a look here at this article, it explains that South African Trade Minister Parks Tau said that a trade deal with the US was very close without providing details. So he said, and I quote, "We are on the verge of negotiating an agreement around tariffs and how they could be reciprocally beneficial." So for those who might not be aware, South Africa has been imposed with 30% tariffs by the United States, meaning that 30% tariffs will apply to any South African exports that are transported to the US. Now, when it comes to assessing the likelihood of a deal, as well as how South African-US relations will proceed, there are actually 4 different factors that we need to consider. So the first factor that really got South Africa onto the US radar is the ICJ case. So soon after the war in the Middle East broke out, South Africa decided to take Israel to the ICJ on claims of genocide happening in Gaza. Now, of course, this infuriated the Trump administration. It's no secret that Israel is a staunch ally of the US and their most reliable partner in the Middle East. And something that truly proved just how strong the US-Israel relations are happened on October the 12th. See, after all, October the 12th is the day that the Trump-Gaza peace plan was implemented. In the morning, all of the remaining living hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza were released and returned to Israel. Furthermore, Trump arrived in Tel Aviv and actually proceeded to Jerusalem, where he became the first US president in history to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Those who actually tuned into the speech will see just how warmly he was received by the Israeli parliament and just how warmly he actually spoke of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the country as a whole. In fact, there was a specific moment where he explained, "I want to express my gratitude to a man of exceptional courage and patriotism whose partnership did so much to make this momentum day possible. You know who I'm talking about. There's only one Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Bibi, please stand up." And then he went on to call him great, saying that he's not the easiest guy to deal with, but this is exactly what makes him great. And he concluded by telling Netanyahu, "Great job." So clearly, Trump and Netanyahu continue to have a very strong friendship, and US and Israeli relations couldn't be stronger than they are right now. Now, what's actually really important to note is that Trump, just a few hours later, traveled to Egypt, where the Gaza Peace Summit was held. So if we take a look at the poster for the summit, we see that world leaders from across the globe were invited to this event. So we can see here that, sure, a lot of them were from the Arab world and the Muslim world, but there were outliers such as Germany, Italy, Pakistan, Greece, Armenia, and of course certain regional partners such as Kuwait, Bahrain, and Turkey. One country that was notably absent was South Africa. Not a single South African representative was invited to this event. And considering that South Africa tried to become front and center in this conflict by going to the ICJ case, one has to ask why. While there's no explicit answer, it certainly seems as if Trump has sent a very strong message to the South African government. Middle East issues aside, we also know that the United States has actually given South Africa an opportunity to improve relations. We saw this when Freedom Front Plus leader Corne Mulder led his own delegation to Washington and actually succeeded where the official government delegation, which met with Trump, failed. He and his delegation were able to extract 4 terms from government officials explaining exactly how South Africa can improve bilateral relations with the US. Firstly, the US wants South Africa to recognize farm attacks as a priority crime. Secondly, they called for the public condemnation of the Kill the Boer chant. The third factor is for expropriation without compensation to be abolished. Finally, the US is seeking exemption for all US companies from BEE requirements. At the time of recording this video, none of these requirements have been met. The third factor that's necessary to consider is the consistent South African diplomatic own goals. You see, earlier this month, South Africa approved a flight permit for a US blacklisted Russian plane coming in from Iran. Now, Durko claimed that they didn't know that the company had been blacklisted. But ask yourself, using common sense, we know that the West has been sanctioning Russia and Russian companies since the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict. So even if we are to say that maybe Durko didn't do their homework, does it make logical sense to assume that a Russian aircraft on its way to Iran is not blacklisted by the US? Sounds fishy to me, and I certainly don't believe Durko for a minute. The final factor to consider is the US's own actions against South Africa. So understandably, South Africa's many diplomatic own goals are not without their consequences. And back in April, US House Representative Ronnie Jackson introduced a bill to Congress. The bill in question is the US-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. And in September, another senator decided to introduce a second piece of legislation. Now, it's very similar to the original piece, except for the fact that while the one speaks about sanctioning the ANC and really speaks about the party as a whole, the original bill speaks about targeting specific ministers, specific political leaders within the ANC. There's also the mention of AGOA, but seeing as Trump has already said that he wants to scrap the AGOA agreement with South Africa, this doesn't really seem very applicable. Still, the original bill, presented by Ronnie Jackson, has actually been approved by the US House Committee. And what this means is that it is able to be introduced to the US House of Representatives. Once this bill is approved, it will go to the Senate, where it will be voted on as well, after which President Trump will sign the bill into law. Now, many might wonder why Kennedy decided to introduce a second bill. And it seems that the main reason is to intensify the process of getting it signed into law. You see, what he's attempting to do is gather consensus within the Senate. And of course, once both the House and the Senate are supportive of the bill, there's a much higher likelihood that it will go into law. And so if we are to take all of these factors into consideration, I wouldn't be too optimistic in believing that South Africa and the US can reach a trade deal. Still, there is a glimmer of hope, you see, because ultimately, if negotiations are ongoing, it means that the Trump administration hasn't entirely given up on South Africa. And hopefully, there is a path to recovering relations and no longer being a pariah on the world stage. Still, even if a deal is reached, I wouldn't expect it to somehow repair relations all of a sudden. After all, the US has seen time and again how South Africa has constantly stigmatized it and gone against the West in favor of parties such as Russia and China. And this is not something that the Trump administration will forget anytime soon. Thanks very much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.